Yo, what's up, Zoxaskun? We're back with some more Etheria Restart. Now, we're going to be getting into updating our tier list, and this is obviously going to be focused a little bit more on PVE, but what we are going to be doing here is obviously giving some TLC, making some adjustments, and then, of course, placing the brand new characters on the list as well. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into it, starting off with the adjustments. Do I feel like there are any adjustments that need to be made with the implementation of the new units or with more testing, etc.? Now, there are a couple, right? So we're going to actually mosey on down to double S. I'm actually going to be shifting Nymphonael up. Personally, I've been using her a lot more. And I will say that, like, you know, at face value, it was like, you know, her shield didn't really seem to be as lucrative, just because it was like, okay, this gets knocked off, then I got to reapply it. So it did force like the Codex of Magic builds quite a bit. But I will say that there are a lot of instances where having shield with the immunity, and specifically shield with immunity with a attack buff, can be quite powerful. And then the HP balance is also another thing that is really, really strong. So a lot of the combinations that I've been able to, like, you know, kind of make do or adjust with, like, I use Nymphonael a lot with like my Lilium, for example, and they really synergize extremely well, because typically you'll see Lilium on count quite a bit, and as long as Lilium is constantly restoring her HP, if Nymphonael is actually rebalancing HP, she always has somewhere to pull from. Considering when you're talking about like 4-man comps where you can't just have like a super tanky unit that's just a HP pool, because that means at that point you're running your team a lot slower, you know, and probably at that point it's a little bit of a different, you know, reasoning or setup that you're kind of going for. But I feel like for still it to be, you know, seeing her in fast-paced stuff, she is one of the best units in Chloros right now. I think that she definitely deserved the shift up. So yeah, that's where she's at now. Another shift up that we're going to actually be making here, and I feel like it's actually one that does make a lot of sense, especially after talking to a lot of you guys, and then also seeing more stuff, is bat speed, right? So I think bat speed does deserve to get shifted up, at least into double S. I think that for what it's worth, he still kind of suffers from the fact that, like, if there's no debuffs, he can't amp, right? But I will say that it does not take away from the fact that he is such a strong DPS. With him fully invested, with him, you know, even having dupes into him, this guy has monstrous damage, and I honestly could say becomes one of the hardest hitters in the entire game. You know, again, for what it's worth, trying to get him to that point definitely is really, really insane, and it's a very, very high investment. But when you can get him there, he is definitely a really, really strong Animus. So yeah, I felt like he deserved to have, you know, a little bit more TLC when it comes down to you know, just where he's ranked, etc. Now, with that, I think that kind of gives, for the most part, basically everything that I can at least think of. I think one unit, I kind of like, I can see it, but I also don't see it. I'm gonna actually, personally, I think Suki's gonna stay. I honestly think she's really an undervalued unit. I just think that, like, people that are using her may not have the lattice in her, so maybe that's why they don't see the value in her. Because I see her getting, like, ranked really low in a lot of places. I'm just like, what is going on? Like, she's actually like a really, really solid unit. And if you don't have like a Lily, Suki can honestly like help out a ton with movement. Really, really strong in PvP too. But even just on the note of PvE, she's really, really good. So yeah, we're gonna be keeping her there because she honestly is really, really strong. I feel like outside of that, there's basically everybody, right? Like, I think that's the shifts where we're currently at. It's still just about the same. Like, nothing major has happened. We haven't had like crazy balances. Even with the new shells, I think that there's still some testing being done with that, and I don't think that any of them has like necessarily shot a unit to the moon per se, but they have made interactions much better in terms of like overall countering. So it's kind of still where it's at, right? So I guess we're going to get into placing the brand new Animuses, starting out with Hazuki. I feel like with Hazuki's definitely a very interesting, she's a very interesting unit, because I personally have been abusing her in PvP, but in PvE, she's kind of like any other CC'er, right? So I'm gonna put her in S tier. I feel like when we're talking about like just her overall value, Hazuki actually is able to really like. She's actually really good in PvE content, right? As a CC unit, you do lose some of the effect that she has with the attack share being like field wide. It's not applicable in PvE content. But what I will say is that Petrify is actually pretty strong when you're going into like things like Innocent Echo, where you can like you're still even in Ember Track going up against regular enemies, you could prevent them from getting cooldowns and stuff like that. So it just gives you more breathing room. But she's not really any different than any of the other CCs. I will say though, of course, there are some obvious boons to her. Like she counteracts units like Sania really well because she has the healing reduction decrease in her kit that affects the field. So she is a very, very good Animus. Absolutely a really, really good one. For me personally, if I was just being biased, I would just put her in double S. But I am trying to obviously be as neutral as possible and just understanding like what her role really is. But I think she is a really, really cool character. And definitely should still be played because it's just like Kraken, Nahor. I feel like those units are extremely strong. And then with Sword being implemented into the game, I think their value actually skyrocketed a little bit more in PvP. Because I wouldn't necessarily advise Sword for PvE that much, but I will say that for PvP, it definitely could be quite lucrative, right? So that's just kind of my take there. And then lastly, we have Plume, okay? So where are we placing Plume? Obviously, in my opinion, Plume is one of the best units in the game. I'm placing her in at the top of triple S. Her and Lily are actually like really, really neck and neck in a lot of ways. I feel like, of course, you always have to argue the differences, just it really is kind of hard to really argue them. It's because they both do two different things, right? Now, when I look at overall utility and how many jobs each character has, I still feel like Plume does more. But I think when you start talking about the matter of the fact and like what's affecting a fight, the job that Lily has is also really important too, like being able to push your DPS so that you can end the fight or, just amp the fight. She does help, make your team rotate faster. She does have the twin trick, which does help with cooldowns. So there's some really important specific things that Lily does, but it does not take away from the fact that Plume also helps manipulate your team's turn meter. She shreds defense. She, takes away any buff basically, and then applies weaken, which makes the enemy deal less damage to you. She increases how much damage is dealt to them. She also has a built-in speed down debuff that will build up as her stacks of her Quill Plume goes up, or her Quill. Is it Quill Plume or Plume Quill or whatever it's called? Or it's Quill something. But her stacks will continuously go up, and it is also permanent, right? So even after death, it still will be applied to you, which means your allies can still take advantage of it, still finish off a fight. You're still like debuffed. It can't be transferred, it can't be removed. So it is absolutely she's an astronomical character. And then to add insult to injury, she actually can do a fair amount of damage herself. I feel like the amount of damage she actually does is kind of sort of scary considering that she is really a support, but she actually has really good damage numbers. And that also is like in conjunction to the fact that she's also AoE. So everything she does from her skill 1 to her skill 3 is AoE. And then, of course, her allies are able to help further stack her debuff, right? So she has a lot of utility. And one of the things I think that a lot of people miss in that comparison is that really Plume is able to take advantage of every aspect of the fight, okay? Lily doesn't really care so much about what her opponent is doing outside of the assistance that she's really giving to her ally. Like, Twin Trick is actually assisting the ally. It's buffing the ally. She's moving her allies, right? The only thing that she has that's really doing something, obviously when she hits, it deals damage. And then when she uses her skill 3, it actually will have a chance of cooling down, which is extremely powerful if you are playing on manual or if you're rotating your team into turn 2. She'll go in like potentially make them not even get a chance to use their stuff, which again is a great pairing with like Hazuki, for example. But outside of that, I will say that you know, Plume makes everything matter. So her allies going matters to like the accumulation or buildup of stacks. Enemies going matters because that's them increasing your turn meter. You know, her being able to strip buffs is insane. Now, I know the question at hand here is, because of Plume, does this mean that like units like Klaus, Heinrich, you know, other units that are able to basically like emulate or do some aspect of her kit, do they get shifted down? No. And the reason why that is because I still think that there's extra additive things, like I mentioned before, that Klaus brings to the table, that Heinrich brings to the table. Klaus still has a speed down that's more straight up front. You know, so that's still really, really strong in a lot of different scenarios, especially if you're not looking for the buff strip or you don't need it. Klaus is still a great like rotating unit and damage amper, especially if we're talking about PvE content. She's still one of the best, especially for her to not be a LD. And then of course Heinrich is still extremely powerful, still one of the top choices if you're going to be buff stripping and also trying to damage amp anything that has like crit damage or crit rate based stuff. So, you know, from the like White Fang builds and stuff like that, like he's still great for that. Blocking buffs is still another huge aspect to his gimmick. And he's still fast, right? Oh yeah, I forgot, Plume is also the fastest character in the game. But either way, right? I don't think it necessarily takes value away from those units. It just is, again, another really insanely valued unit because she can dabble into each job. But those units are still high in value. Like if you don't have Plume, you're still going to use Klaus. You're still going to use Heinrich. Even if you do, there's still going to be situations where you might use Plume and Klaus together. You might use Heinrich and Plume together, right? Like it really isn't going to be one of those things where you just never touch that unit again, at least as of right now. So yeah, guys, that's basically what we currently got going on with the tier list. Nothing too crazy. I'm not gonna take up too much of your time, but I just wanted to make sure that we got this out there so that you guys understood what exactly and where exactly things are at. We are going to be rotating into buff season because we're coming to the end of this current season for RTA. So we could be seeing some units buff, and of course those buffs could very well be affected not only PvE but also PvP. So we'll be doing the PvP tier list once those buffs go through, just because more than likely those buffs are going to heavily affect PvP more than anything. But nonetheless, that's going to be that with this one, guys. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Everyone, stay blessed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.